Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today we'll be reflecting on the books that comprise my second omnibus of my Down Dimensions universe, beginning with Volume 1 of the Down Dimensions, the first book I ever wrote. It really just was a novelisation. It's obviously changed a little with time, with this new version I've concocted for this omnibus. I've rewritten things in terms of an inventory and crafting table and respawning device to give more context, as at the time I was deciding whether it would just be a Minecraft novel, set within just the Minecraft world, or make it a whole sort of fictional universe in that sense. It changed a lot as I was writing it, but obviously as I've gone through it again now, many years later, that volume is now more in sync, I suppose, with the rest of the lore I've created, and Dan has too. But even at the start in 2014, I had to come up with a story, so I invented the UDG, a unidimensional gateway, a machine that Traorus could have made, which then strands Dan in the Diamond Overworld, in the Diamond Dimensions. And that really helped, obviously, link the series to Dan's lab mythology and things, even though at the time in 2013, when he started the Diamond Dimensions, there was no lab yet. But in my world, he'd already been at the lab for a year by the time he's gone to the Diamond Dimensions. And I added in a bit more story threads in terms of the Watcher, just thinking about things that could link in with this character that I hadn't really fleshed out in my head yet. So, how there's the glitches of the mobs going through the walls, I worked that in to be something the Watcher can do, which then turned to the whole thing of phasing, which I'm quite happy with that, set that up. And also the cube bots, which then I suppose retroactively linked to the Watcher in Origins in a way, because of the soul crystals. And it was also about giving context to the creatures, all the different creatures, and adding in more story with the Mystic Enderman, the Shaman and the Hunters, the Q-bots, and the whole sort of backstory of the Diamond Overworld, in a sense, in the way that it was, untouched by humans for centuries, the concept of a zombie apocalypse, and the fact that Imelda was retroactively introduced in the first chapter, as Dan encountered the witch from the Grimoires of Gaia mod, and that then later became, as I was writing Origins, it has made sense that would be Imelda. And yeah, there was also the Familiars mod that I worked into the story, as to make the mods book that then you can summon in the different familiars, the different allies. You had to get the drop of each monster and create the book, so I worked that in as a way to get the Book of the Diamond Dimensions, which was then linked to the Watcher, linked to Companion Cube, the Redstone Torches, that whole thing. And it also gave a way for me to tell the reader about these new creatures, as Dan is finding about them too, and work in my own lore, and have that all linked not as a mod, but as, something magical, something related to the Watcher. Because obviously Rana came from the Familiars mod too, she's introduced in Volume 2, but at the time of the series, Dan was switching between the different familiars, like the skeleton one that could shoot things, and Companion Cube that provided the shield, and also Navi that found the diamonds, but I worked them all into this. It's just Companion Cube in my story. And yeah, so I decided that Diamond Dimensions were going to be a class of dimensions in this first volume as well, which set up, I suppose, the whole thing. There were other classes of dimensions. It's a version of Dan's home overworld, and it also helped in this volume just to, as it takes place just in the nearby surroundings, it fleshed out the landscape around where Dan set up his house and introduced all these other creatures like the dwarves, the dryads, the Spriggans. And that's what I really like about this volume, how it, it's not massive in scale, I suppose, it's just Dan surviving a novelisation of the episodes, but you're introduced to a lot of things, and obviously there couldn't be any rest of the story without it. Volume 2, the subtitle Discovery, as Companion Cube discovered the other dimensions for Dan. Atom, the Atom as I call it then, in these omnibuses I just refer to it as Atom like the mod actually is, and the Eternal Frost. I want to introduce the other familiar Dan had earlier in this book. In chapter 1, I introduced Rana, linked her into the Dryad mythology, and which was a good move in terms of other storytelling possibilities down the line. And the fact that she's shot down in the new version, it's linked to how her magic helped the crops grow as well. That's the only other way to explain that. In the first books, I was talking about how the days are quicker and of different lengths, just as a way to explain the fact that I'm novelising, a Minecraft day that's short, and sometimes lots of events happen. Sometimes, it's just a quick day. But now going back through, I've changed that concept because obviously the time distortion doesn't happen until volume 8, and it's not experienced as your in-it is experienced from the outside. So retroactively, I've linked in Rana as well to having the crops grow. If you read the book, you'll have known that. And speaking of the crops, that also links to Dan's clone, which is the other major character introduction in this volume, and the whole thing of it improving that story. In this volume, Dan also takes on a battle tower, which is now more linked to the mythology of his worthiness after Origin's idea that the Watchers made those. So when I was going back through this volume, I sort of made that a bit more apparent as well. And in this volume we also got to explore the Diamond Overworld a bit more and flesh out the idea of Atom and Egyptian mythology in the last few chapters. Expanded on the idea of the Atom a lot since then. And also in Volume 2 is when I first teased the dimensional doors linked to the Watchers for the first time, really. A major bit of Wraith magic that I was still, fleshing out in my head. I didn't have a full idea of until I sat down to write Volume 3. And at the time I was also writing Origins and The Cave at that point with my dad. Trying to think what more to say of Volume 2 there is, really. Introducing the clone is the major thing. I've also changed how Dan's clone is made in this version. And also because in the series, he had a clone that died that became the second clone for me that he made. And then Father Pigman is a renamed clone from that mod. But obviously in my story, I didn't introduce Far until the Nether, because that made more sense. But then this clone, I made him mute because I suppose I didn't want to just come up with lots of dialogue, but in the end it became a bit of a hassle to have him write down with a different font. But anyway, I've changed that in these omnibuses. Volume 3, my favourite thing about this volume is really the Cold Night battle in Chapter 6, and the whole backstory / mythology I created with all the history of the Yetis, the Cold Steel artifacts, the castles, with the village on the surface and the frostbite spiders as well. Also with the adventure theme and in the Nether, I introduced other creatures and other dimensions through that adventure. So yeah, the Twilight Forest and Erebus were introduced as diamond dimensions. The decision to include Erebus as a world from Season 2 was a good decision, I suppose, as well. I knew that those episodes were obviously coming up. I think I probably watched them at that point in Season 2 and thought it just made sense, even if I never wrote Season 2, to have Erebus be a diamond dimension. Even if the Tropicraft world wasn't, and obviously all the dimensions in Season 3 became the golden dimensions for me in my head. And I suppose at this point I'd also set up other groups, like the fact that the Lion King mod and Tropicraft wouldn't be diamond dimensions. I didn't know if I was going to include the Lion King mod at this point in my novelizations, and that tied into all these other groups of dimensions talked about in Origins, written at the same time as Mara's introduced in this volume. yeah, this volume, I suppose, really was the beginning of a wider universe with a history, with a full history fleshed out as I was writing Origins, of course. Also in the volume, Father Pigman is introduced. Yeah, looking back on it, I don't know why I made him a bit timid, injured, but it was an excuse to get him to come back, and obviously it'd be someone that Dan could help, because in the series, yeah, he was a renamed Farmer clone, and obviously Farmer gave the name to the character. Dan was looking for a farmer skin, but it didn't come up until far, and it was the Pigman in a suit, and that became such a big character of the series in a way. He was always there in season 1 and then came back in season 2. But in my books, he's introduced just as this Pigman who, in the Diamond Dimensions, because it's an alternate universe, I suppose, that not all pigmen became zombified. Obviously, in the new Minecraft editions, we've had piglins introduced, but they're something separate from my universe now. They're just a different race of pigmen in the Iron Overworld that hadn't been discovered by mankind until later than 2013 when the update actually came out. So yeah, I waited till Dan went to the Nether to introduce Far, and I also needed a reason to have Mara give him the quest to go home, which is finished in Volume 5. So, after he's saved the Eternal Frost, she comes to him to reward him with this idea of going home. Yeah, because he did such a selfless act. Mara went to Remelta to try and find a way to get him home, and she went straight to Dan after that to tell him, knowing that in weakening the Lich Gas and the Mino Shroom, he'd be doing the Twilight Forest a favour as well, and then he would have helped at least in 4 Diamond Dimensions. The fact that he saved Rana in the Diamond Overworld too. Just backtracking, yeah, I did the whole thing in this one of characterising the village as well, and introducing these characters. I mean, Maximilian, who's the name of somebody in my class, the blacksmith, and the whole idea of a village guard, and also the kids Matt and Darren were named after the hosts of the Insomnia Gaming Festival where I first met Dan. I think they were hosts for at least the first 2 I went to. The first one when I met him and appeared in the vlog, and the second one where at that point I'd finished Volume 1 and he gave me permission to publish. I'm just going to add in the thoughts now in my back at the lab sections as writing this omnibus, putting this omnibus together, this second omnibus. Obviously the back at the lab sections are after every 5th and 10th chapter, so between every 5 chapters of the volumes. But since at the time I think I just wanted to break up the story and also write a bit about Traorus, I had them every 5th chapter, and it made sense at the time to me that as the days were passing quicker in the Diamond Dimensions, that back at the lab sections would be happening over a much shorter time span. But obviously now, as I've finished the whole universe and have everything in my head and sort of retconned, that's not happening anymore. So back at the lab sections had to be reordered and interwoven more with the earlier volumes. So, so we're a way to get context and reflection given through Dr. Traorus. And I also obviously wove in a Denton plot like those I liked from Dan's videos. And the idea of him cloning Dan and Dr. Zook's lab as a way of Denton training the clone. I think Dan was doing lots of the lab mini-games on whichever server it was, Hypixel, on his channel at the time, and I quite liked them and thought that was something fun to work in, as something different in the back of the lab sections. A bit of a longer sections of story there. And I also think the back of the lab things to the Live Insomnia show that Dan did where Traorus was kidnapped, and I first sort of met Denton with the secret underground facility under the lab, and how I introduced the idea how Dr. Traorus is uploading the series to Dan's channel. And yeah, looking at it now as a completed omnibus as I've reordered them, it's amazing how they fit in with the time past up until Volume 5's bits. They're all way earlier. Because in Volume 6, back at the lab, sort of tied in with the real time with Gemma and the rifts opening, but before then it will have to be shifted up. Yeah, and within the later back of the lab sections, I also included things from the Enchanted Crystal, Dan's graphic novel book, like Denton's Balloon, and also mentioning the elves, which links in with that book, and also with Dan's Christmas Countdown series, which, you know, that's something with his mythology they actually linked story-wise, and I'm glad I could work that in. Also, the fact that Dr. Zook's lab was powered by a giant crystal. When I was writing that, Dan had just got the new lab, so it worked in nicely that seeing a giant lab powered by a big power crystal could then link to the future lab. And I also liked how I added the lab in a new context. The Dr. Zook lab with people kidnapped by Denton, as we sort of find out, and sent there before it became a sort of amusement park in my world. As obviously mini games are just mini games, but in terms of if I'm making it a real universe, these places are sort of the equivalent of amusement parks where you'd go and, you know, play these different games. Volume 4 now, moving on to. I really enjoyed this Volume 2, getting to really make a story out of a quest to get home and expand and explore so much of the Twilight Forest's mythology with all the new races and beasts that Dan faces. Adding in the part for the quest ram and beginning the wider spirit mythology as well in this book, and all the stuff about the Skeleton Empire, the Urgas Empire, all stuff I got to explore more in 4.5 with Imelda's story, and tied into the stories as I was writing Volume 4. Also, linking with Origins, I felt that I could have an appearance now from Joshua and Tyler. Obviously, if you read Origins, you know who they are. If not, you're just sort of told who they are. But tying that origin story properly to the main volumes, and fleshing out obviously consequences for Mara for disobeying the rules of the Order. And yeah, as I was reading through, I didn't know why I had the Lich know about Dan. You know that there was a Watcher and this human would be coming, but at the time I was writing about Imelda 4.5, so I guess she told the Lich after making that nonsense list up for Mara things Dan needed to get home, that Joshua gives to Dan, as Mara is put in the void. Yeah, I was working through as well, keeping track of the days for a proper track this time. Time gets a little hard to track as it's always twilight, but yeah, anyway, hopefully it comes across how much I loved the Twilight Forest mod in this book, and I think the fact that I also tied it into so many other stories, even in the cave, and obviously more in Volume 5 to come. But yeah, it's a little aside. I remember Dan said to me when I gave him, might be one of the last ones I gave him actually, because I haven't met him for quite a while. When I gave him the physical copy of Volume 4, he said it was one of his favourite mods too. And I think he liked the cover image, and I did too for this volume. The images are all from a site, I can't remember what it's called, I might make a video on it at some point, where you could just enter in a Minecraft username and it would put the skin into the image. So I used those for my covers. Also in this there's another little side story. Maximilian, who I mentioned in Volume 3, the character is named after this person from my school, he suggested to actually end a book on a cliffhanger. I didn't really know quite what that was going to be. I think I'd wondered whether to end Volume 3 with Dan being taken by the spiders and swallowed up into the portal, but I thought it best to leave Volume 3 as a close, and then Volume 4 would really start the Twilight Forest stuff. And but that's what I did with this one, with Dan falling from the Urgas Tower with the Goblin Charm of Life, as it became in my mythology, a Goblin Charm. We now move on to Volume 4.5, the two short stories that take place between Volume 4 and Volume 5. It was a bit tricky as well because the one with Craig and the animals took place between the back of the lab sections in Volume 4 and 5, but they actually take place earlier, so I had to rework it just slightly. But the first 4.5 short story, anyway, is The New Watchers in Town. It was the first time I got to spend more time with my original characters from Origins, outside of that book. And also helped to set up what I was writing in Volume 5, with Far and the clone coming back, and the idea of the Shaman spirit artifact as well, and how Mara had left, and the Riftblade and everything. But also tying into the Watchers series, I didn't quite know what it was going to be. So, yeah, actually the names I picked for the 8 recruits that Mara sees as he comes out of the void were quite random, but I think they all worked out in the end. And I made the decision, obviously, when I was writing the last chapter of Origins, but also more in this story, Marcus just sort of became this conflicted villain in a way, villain in the sense that he's acting against Mara, but just by being a law-abiding watcher, but he's also changing things up, so it was nice to give him some closure in this book anyway, and expand a little on the Watcher's lore. And tie to Jinx, I don't really know why I had Mara go meet him, and like I said, yeah, and her might as well. The Atom spirit artifact that Dan's clone is fated to use. The second 4.5 short story is Postman and Pets. As with the other 4.5 stories, the earlier ones, the prequel ones, I just wanted to spend some time with other lab characters, this time chronologically in the right place in the series, so I explored Craig as a character through the eyes of Cliff, based on the Cheers character, another postman, and gave sort of new life and context to the rarely seen Terence and McDuck characters from Dan's old mod reviews, the pig and the chicken. And I'm still amused as I read through it, I remember, by the voices I chose to give them, the way they talk. So, Terence sort of has his own dialect, you could say, and he oinks, and whereas McDuck talks in short 2-word sentences, and box occasionally. Now moving on to the last main book in this omnibus, Volume 5 of the Damned Dimensions. Obviously this one had to pick up where the other one left off, with explorations into my own sort of concept of undying vengeance, a side effect of being brought back through the goblin charm rather than dying and having your body warped and respawning where the device was set. It was also fun, and I'm quite proud of exploring further the Twilight Forest mythology with other items on Dan's quest, with the fiery blood from the Hydra, and obviously finally getting the Carmenite, and also exploring the Minor Shroom's Labyrinth. Also brought back the Skeleton Commander that I added in a massively expanded Twilight Lich fight in the previous volume as a sort of recurring threat. I didn't really know what plans I had for him, but I thought it would be somewhat entertaining if he survived the fall. And I added in the wolf from the episodes as well, Dan's pet wolf that he has in the Twilight Forest that he loses. Could have just left it out, but I think I'm glad that I added it in the end. And I'm also happy with how that whole Minor Shroom section worked out, and a battle with the Hydra. Also, having Far obviously stick around in this volume was important to the series, and also future stories in a way. I'd already set up with the catacombs in other stories within Origins, but in the second half of this book they were fun to explore and to pad out the long hour special episode of Dan just exploring those catacombs to sort of, much more condense the actual, all that just fighting and exploring. But adding in my own dream of fates, which was, I suppose, a turning point for the series as well, because that served as a link to the whole overarching force of the Void and of Fate, and linked in retrospectively to the end of Poltergeist returning as an explanation for it. I wanted to explore the whole universe plot, I think, the whole history of my mythology in the Stream of Fates, showing Egypt, as I just fleshed out in 4.5, Ramesses' story. And yeah, I'm going through my notes as I'm recording this. I forgot to mention in the previous video that I chose Ramesses the eighth for the pharaoh that would become the first Watcher, as he's one pharaoh that not much is known about, and I don't think his tomb's been found. He only was pharaoh for a few years, maybe just 2 years. And so it worked out nicely that he was a pharaoh that could conceivably just have gone missing after serving only 2 years if he did warp to another dimension. And that's why there's no tomb for him as well in the Valley of the Kings. Yeah. That also tied into the Watchers series retrospectively as well, I suppose. And in this volume with the Rifts too, at the end of this book, really set out what I was going for with the prophecy, the worldliness and the saviors, in a sense, where Dan, tries to go home, and the rifts all open up as shown in the Dream of Fates as well. I also added in the Dream of Fates the creep a bit from 4.5, and then showed the future through misadventures that had just come out in that dream. I didn't really know how it would be realised, but I decided then that whatever direction misadventures took, I thought I'd work into my books, obviously, as it was new. First time actual Diamond Dimension story content from Dan in 2017. And I also included things like Smashing Through the Glass, which would be realised in Volume 8, and showing the new lab. And this also built towards the main plot of Endgame in a way in this volume, because after the Dream of Fates, Dan comes across a rebel battle planning session. I'd always been a fan of everything Ender, the aesthetic and the lore of the End and other Ender mods as well, and I wanted to include it in my books even before writing Diamond Dimensions. I think I first little thing into Minecraft writing I started writing some sort of Ender book, but gave that up. I didn't know the exact plot, obviously, of Volume 8, but what I wrote here with the model egg and the Mystic Ender Minion stealing a staff really paved the way for the main series finale in Volume 8. And I'm also glad I got to tie in with Origins with the Cubot factory a bit, and also flesh out some mythology for the Wither. I didn't know quite how it would happen until after Volume 4 was released, but I came to planning the chapter after more thought about the use of a rift blade in 4.5 for that day of severance. But I'm still enthralled with how that event played out, with all the other characters in Imelda and Jinx and everything coming to inclusion. And also, the fact in this volume, the Wither episodes, I moved them obviously earlier in the timeline. They were after Dan went to the Pride Lands in the series. But the fact that I moved them earlier as something as a way to get the quest, to get the Nether Star and then destroy the Rift system, which of course sets up Volume 6. So in the last chapter of Volume 5 I got to explore Limbo and Dimensional Dungeons from a later episode in the Pride Lands where Dan explores it. And in my version, obviously, the Pride Lands, it made more sense for the story that Dan is just randomly sent out there with a quest. And the fact that Companion Cube falls down into Limbo and Mara obviously sets up when we see all the characters again, and they're all put apart, ready to come back together. And the Rift System exploding also had the wider implications for the Watchers universe, as obviously it would affect the whole between worlds. And those effects that will be seen in the third omnibus. The last thing included in this second omnibus, it might be the longest of all four because it's got the whole 5 volumes, 2 short stories, and it also includes Before the Beginning, which is the original opening I wrote to the Watchers series. Because yeah, as previously mentioned, I didn't have an exact plan for the Watchers series until I finished writing the first one, really, or even until I came to writing the second one. More ideas came to me with the old hall and the Riftblade Forge and things like that. But I enjoyed just writing purely from my own imagination in that Watchers series and in the universe I created off Dan's videos. Yeah, this original opening was a way to tie the Watchers series straight to Volume 5, which it still does, but eventually became unnecessary as the book took form, and I began to structure the Watchers into a thing with a prologue and the different title, different point of view for each short chapter, and with the interlude and epilogues as well. But yes, I still like the insight this short story offers. As well, I worked in flashbacks from Casper's point of view of the lessons, so I thought it was a worthy inclusion as the exclusive short story to this omnibus. And it might be the omnibus I'm most, well, I don't know if it's I'm most proud of, but it's the one where you get the whole story from Dan arriving up until the point where he thinks he's going home, and then everything goes wrong to be explored in the third omnibus. But another video of rambling. I hope you enjoyed. Hope I offered some interesting insights. Omnibus Volume 2 is, of course, out now, available in Kindle paperback forms. Please remember to like the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to keep up to date with all the videos I release. And thank you for watching.